Reflection, Chapter 4. She realized how little she knew about him. She knew nothing about his family, other than his father had been the Emperor's most trusted general. She didn't know anything about his life growing up either, what he liked to eat or read, even where he was from. As their leader, Shang had avoided socializing with the troops. He never joined in drinking games or jokes. After meals, he had always retreated to his tent to study battle plans and maps. Then again, no one had ever sought him out. Now Mulan wished she'd gotten to know him better. She hadn't realized until now how dedicated Shang had been to ensuring the regiment became a team. Most other captains probably wouldn't have known her name, but Shang would run alongside her and the other recruits to make sure no man was left behind. He sculpted each soldier's individual weaknesses into strengths, and he even risked his life for her. "Stop thinking like that," she thought miserably. "You sound like he's going to die." She watched his chest rise and fall. The movement so imperceptible she wondered if she imagined it. She couldn't even hear him breathe. Reaching for his wrist, she kept her hand over his, feeling for his pulse. Still there. Still faint. "Shane is not going to die," Mulan whispered aloud. She choked back a sob. "He's not." But even she couldn't persuade herself. Moisture tingled in her eyes, and the swell in her throat hurt more and more as she tried to hold on to her emotions. "He's not!" Hot tears perked down her cheeks as she unfolded her arms and sat up. She wiped her face, tasting the salt in her tears as they slipped to the corner of her mouth. Her hands trembled at her side, and her head felt light. Fatigue was catching up with her, and she blamed it for her doubts. "Need to sleep," her body begged. "Just a little. Just for a few minutes." "No." The words swayed, her eyelids half closed. "Must watch Shang. Must watch. You can't take care of him if you don't take care of yourself. Sleep. Just a little." Just a little. Finally, Mulan crawled away from Shang's side and retreated to the back corner of the tent, leaning against a pole. She hugged her arms against her chest and stretched out her legs over the frosted grass. Her breathing slowed. She didn't know how long she slept, minutes or hours, before a burst of wind brushed her cheek and woke her. Moonlight seeped into her eyes, and had the tent's flap come loose? Mulan jerked upright with worry and started to get up to close the flap against the chill breeze. But then she froze. It wasn't moonlight at all, or a loose tent flap. It was a man, leaning over next to Shang. He was dressed in a military uniform, but he wasn't one of Shang's soldiers, and they had to be days from the closest village. That was odd. But even more odder, he glowed. Was she dreaming? Mulan rubbed her eyes. He still glowed. From his hair to his boots he radiated a soft greenish blue, as if someone had put a lantern in the deepest part of the ocean. His ghostly face shone so brightly Mulan couldn't make out his features. His voice was low and soft. "Please don't die," he said to Shang. "It is not your time." Careful to stay shrouded in the shadows, Mulan rose. She didn't recognize the stranger, and his uniform was blue, like the rest of him, so she couldn't identify his rank. But she could tell his armor's quality was better than Shang's, a clue that he was an officer of high rank. A general. "My son," the general said. "Can you hear me?" Mulan caught her breath. "My son. If the man was Shang's father, then he was General Li. No, that's impossible. General Li is dead. I must be dreaming. I must be so tired I even know I'm dreaming." She shrank back to her corner. General Li's body shimmered with watery blue light, and his boots, Mulan saw, barely touched the ground. Definitely can't be real. I should go back to sleep. But she couldn't. Not while General Li wept over his son's body. She watched his shoulders shake as he exhaled. It was a ragged, sorrow-ridden breath, one that touched Mulan to the core. If this ghost, this spirit, truly was Shang's father, she had to do whatever she could to ease both their suffering. She took a step forward to him. If General Li saw her, he didn't acknowledge it. His attention was on his son. "Do you remember, Shang, when you were a child?" he said. "Even when you were already my best student. Do you remember how your ma would scold you for studying military history instead of the classics, and how you turned her zither into a target for your shooting practice? I had to reprimand you, but inside I was so proud. You weren't afraid of anything, except disappointing me. And when it finally came time for you to lead your own regiment into battle, I had such high hopes for you. But I should not have underestimated Shan Yu's army. I failed you, my son. Mulan pursed her lips, unsure how to address the ghost. General Li? Shang's father turned to her, and a quiet gasp escaped Mulan's lips. The general's resemblance to his son was striking. They had the same probing dark eyes, the same square jaw and earnest brow. But unlike Shang, gray streaked the general's hair along his temples, and a carefully groomed beard dressed the lower contours of his face. Mulan composed himself. I'm Ping. I'm your son's... She stumbled over what to say. Recruit? Soldier? I'm your son's friend. At that, General Li's expression softened, and he bowed his head. Ah, I see. Thank you for watching over him, Ping. You will be released from your duty shortly. Mulan frowned at his words. What did he mean? She'd be released shortly? Was Shang going to die? She started to ask him, but the question clung to her throat, so she said instead, General Li, pardon me for asking, but how are you here? Shang will not make it through the night, General Li informed her sadly, without answering her question. He will join me in the underworld. Sir, Mulan croaked, her voice crawling out of her lips. What are you saying? You don't mean that Captain Li is going to Yes. General Li cut her off. I thank you for all you have done, but there is nothing that could have saved my son. Shang's spirit is already on its way to Daiyu. In the morning, he will pass on. Daiyu. Her grandmother had told her stories about the underworld when she was a girl, about how every person, good or bad, descended into Daiyu upon death for judgment. There, King Yama, the ruler of Daiyu, would judge one's time on earth and determine how long one must stay in the underworld as a ghost. Some would have to wait a year, others centuries. Some would never leave. They became demons. Be a good girl, Grandmother Fa used to say, or King Yama will turn you into a demon. Respect your ancestors, or none of their ghosts will greet you when you descend to Daiyu and guide you through the underworld. Mulan blinked. All those tales, they were just folk tales, legends, weren't they? No, she whispered, shaking her head at General Li. No, there has to be a way to save him. I'm afraid there is not. You're a spirit, she reasoned, and yet you've managed to break the boundaries between here and Daiyu. You must know of a way I can save Shang. General Li hesitated. His face was sorrowful. I shouldn't be here. My family owes you its gratitude. Ping, for watching Shang over these last few hours. No, Mulan said. You don't. She curled her fists, sucked in a deep breath. I owe Shang my gratitude. It's because of me he's dying. Your son saved me from Shan Yu. If not for him, I would be dead. It is I who owe him a debt, and I will do whatever it takes to save his life. General Li studied her. Anything? Yes, she whispered. Tell me if there's a way to save him. I heard what you said, that it isn't his time to die yet. He's a good man, your son. Please let me save him. General Li stroked the sides of his beard, considering. There is a way, he said at last, but it is impossible. Tell me. The only way is to change King Yama's mind, the general replied. But Shang's name has already appeared on King Yama's Book of Judgment. He cannot be erased from it. It is only impossible if I don't try, Mulan said fiercely. And I will. You are a man of unusual fortitude, Ping. A trace of hope lifted the general's voice, but only slightly. He nodded. You will need it, if you are to save my son, though I suggest you wake up first. Mulan tilted her head. What? Her vision blurred and the sound of a large gong boomed. She jerked awake, hitting her head on the tent pole behind her as her ears buzzed and rang. She clutched her temples. Hadn't she just been standing next to Shang? Now here she was in the corner, her armor in a pile beside her. She kicked the ground in frustration. Was it really only a dream? She sat up, glanced at Shang. He lay motionless as before, but he was still breathing. That was a relief. Then she remembered what General Li had said, that Shang would die in the morning. Mulan peeked out of the tent, glimpsing the black, black night. Not one star in sight. Sunrise was perhaps several hours away. She sat back down, clasped her arms together, shivered. Mushu and Cricky were asleep, and there was no sign of a gong. Maybe I'm going crazy, she thought. First, that dream about General Li, and now this. Then, ping! A beast roared. The gong sounded again. Boom! Another roar. Ping!